Hello to everyone who's joined us. Welcome. My name is Amy Quillen, and I'm the new engagement liaison at the Rural Development Institute at Brandon University. I'm looking forward to sharing best practices that we learn here at RDI with our PLC members and stakeholders. Our session today will be bringing the university to rural Ontario, brokering campus and community engagement in Haliburton. And our presenters are Jim Blake from Haliburton, who will be providing a community perspective. Emily Amon, a master's student at Trent University, who will be providing a student perspective. And Stephen Hill, also from Trent University, who will be providing us with a university perspective. And I'm going to pass it over to Jim Blake to start things off for us. So Jim, you can share your screen now, and you guys, what actual time is it? Yeah, we're already 5 minutes in, so you can go ahead. Over to you.
Okay, we'll just get this going here. All right, there we go. So welcome to our session. We're thrilled to be talking to people from all over the place about what is happening here. Today we're talking about the community campus relationship between Haliburton County, a rural area of Ontario, and Trent University. And oops, go back one here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Ontario, here we have a map of Ontario showing the location of Haliburton County, which is just south of Algonquin Park. It's in the traditional territories of the Mississauga Anishinaabe and the Algonquin Anishinaabe, with a landmass of around 4,000 square kilometers, which is over 2/3 the size of Prince Edward Island. If you look on a topographical map, you can see why the area is called Haliburton Highlands. It forms the headwaters of 3 watersheds. There are hundreds of lakes and small year-round population of 18,000. The villages of Haliburton and Minden are the 2 main population centers, but there are a number of other villages and hamlets. It takes an hour and a half to drive from the south to the north of the county. It is a rugged terrain, but is a vibrant community with life enhanced by a seasonal population of around 45,000 who have cottages on dozens of the lakes. The main campus of Trent University is in Peterborough, Ontario, on the Otonabee River, and an hour and a half drive south the village of Haliburton. So just give you some perspective of the distances. Trent University was founded in 1964. In 1972, the university formally launched its Canadian Studies program. Alan Wilson, also founding chair of the Department of History, was charged with the responsibility of leading Trent's first interdisciplinary program. John Wadland was the first academic appointment. So I'm just giving you a little background on how we actually got to this whole engagement with the university and our community. Wilson had a long-time friendship with Mary Northway and Flora Morrison, who founded a small out-tripping camp for girls on a 26-acre property called Windy Pine on Lake Couchog in Haliburton County in 1941. Mary was a psychology professor and the director of research at the Institute for Child Study at U of T. As Mary and Flora grew older and were unable to lead canoe trips, they gradually changed Windy Pine site into a summer retreat for their friends, most of who were professional women from a broad range of occupations. They took an avid interest in the development of Trent University and specifically the Canadian Studies program. In the summer of 1972, immediately following his admission to the faculty, John Wadland was enlisted as custodian at Windy Pine on the recommendation of Alan Wilson. Wadland was still in the process of putting together the final touches on his PhD. So having his own rent-free cabin in the woods with daytime responsibility for routine maintenance around the property made this arrangement most agreeable. Evenings were left free entirely for writing and new course preparation. The true highlight of his experience came from the deep and enduring friendship with Mary and Flora that grew from it. A combination of all these factors led to Mary, after Flora's death, bequeathing the Windy Pine property to the Canadian Studies program at Trent as a retreat, conference center, and base for research. She also provided an endowment for the maintenance of the property. Prior to her death in 1987, Mary requested that Windy Pine be used as a base for, among other things, giving back to the Haliburton community, which had been such an important part of her life. This set the groundwork for over 30 years of Trent University's engagement with the Haliburton Highlands community. 1987 was also the year that the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development, also known as the Brundtland Commission, published its report, Our Common Future. Professor Wadland of Canadian Studies and his friend and colleague, Professor Tom Willans of the Environmental Studies program, were both taken by the report's central admonition, in the interest of sustainability, to think globally, act locally. This fit perfectly with their shared interest in the emerging theory of bioregionalism. They were inspired to develop a new interdisciplinary honors bioregionalism course that could serve two distinct ends: the intellectual challenge of exploring a new idea from science, social science, and humanities perspectives, and accomplishing this with dedicated students undertaking research that would actually meet the needs of a local community. Both faculty members agreed that this course would focus on the Haliburton Highlands with Windy Pine as its base, and also fulfill Trent University's commitment to Mary Northway to give back to the Haliburton community. Wadland and Willans launched their bioregionalism course in the autumn of 1989, focusing on the Haliburton Highlands, which is also the headwaters of the Trent watershed, of which Peterborough itself is a part. Wadland and Willans quickly learned that a foundation of trust with the community was most important for the success of their course. They turned their energy to building that foundation through open collaborative research strategies, engaging students and community members. By degrees, and over the years, they built an expanding conversation in which the process of collaboration with community members was cemented in friendships and a sense of shared purpose. Between 1989 and 2002, the final year the course was offered, students individually and in groups undertook over 150 distinct projects meeting research needs identified by community partners. The papers produced remain available for any citizen of the community to read. In 1995, Trent University's graduate program, the Frost Center for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, collaborated in a pilot project in Peterborough on community enterprise development. The partners were 14 Peterborough-based public interest institutions, led by the Community Opportunity Innovation Network, COIN, and the Peterborough Social Planning Council. A course on community enterprise development provided research support for this initiative. In 1996, taking the bioregionalism and the CED courses as models, Trent extended its partnership with the COIN and PSPC to establish the Trent Center for Community-Based Education, TCCBE. The underlying logic was that if community-based research had worked in Haliburton, it should also be offered as an option in Peterborough. Projects were solicited from host agencies in the Peterborough community and sought out interested senior students. Projects were negotiated with the faculty member who accepted academic advisory responsibility. A contract was entered into by the host agency, the student, the faculty member, and the TCCBE Management Committee, each agreeing to define responsibilities. The university reviewed the proposed program and endorsed it in the Senate. After 3 years of positive student response, the Management Committee persuaded the university to adopt a plan whereby participating departments could dedicate third and fourth year course numbers to community-based research projects. This made it possible for a faculty member of any department to construct a pedagogy around a research need determined in the community. Such a course would serve several students or merely one. With this foundation in place, Wadland and Willans encouraged the community activists, of whom I was one, and leaders in Haliburton, who had supported the bioregionalism course, to establish a similar community-based committee in Haliburton County. In this way, the community would take ownership of the identification of local research needs. This was formed as the ULinks Center for Community-Based Research in 1999 under the auspices of the Haliburton County Community Cooperative, a grassroots organization focused on community economic development and community capacity building. The goal of ULinks was to create a symbiotic relationship with Trent and other universities, bringing the resources of the university to the community and the knowledge and experience of the community to the university. From 1999 to 2002, the bioregionalism course evolved into Independent Center for Community-Based Research. ULinks and the TCCBE developed a partnership to provide community-based research opportunities for Trent University students in Peterborough and Haliburton, and Trent University committed to providing funding to support the work. The understanding was that Trent would provide 2/3 of the cost of the program, and the community would raise the other third. The township of Minden Hills in Haliburton County provided the space for the ULinks office. For almost 20 years, ULinks has been linking community organizations and municipalities who have research questions with students and faculty who are interested in undertaking research or community-based projects. ULinks has also linked up organizations and faculty to provide community service learning projects. Since its inception in 1999, ULinks has shepherded hundreds of research and community service learning projects engaging thousands of students. The research papers are all available to the community through an online database, the Haliburton County Collection, and through the county library. The ULinks Management Committee consists of representatives from a broad variety of sectors of the community, representatives from Trent University and Fleming College, as well as representatives from Municipal Council. ULinks is staffed with 2 full-time equivalents who facilitate the relationship between the community and the university. The staff and committee members are also engaged in community development, bring groups together to identify community needs, liaising with community groups to develop research proposal, and looking at ways to apply the research within the community. Each spring, a celebration of research is held by ULinks. The students all prepare posters of their work, and the community is invited to hear about some of the highlights and to talk to the students about their research. This event attracts around 100 community members each year. In addition to working with Trent University, ULinks has partnered with a number of different universities, colleges, and organizations on various research initiatives. ULinks also undertakes research projects independent of the university when specific and timely outcomes are required. As a participant in the Suffice project, ULinks has developed its capacity by accessing funding to have master's students as embedded research in the community, undertaking projects that are more in-depth and long-term. A number of the research projects have led to significant policy development in local governments and agencies. Sometimes the research has led to the creation of new committees or organizations which dig deeper and champion various issues. Given the location of Haliburton County, with a landscape mostly of forests, lakes, and wetlands, environmentally related research has played a key role. But there's also work to be done. There's also lots of work that has been done in the areas of active transportation, housing, poverty reduction, rural transportation, food security, local agriculture, tourism, local history, and much more. On this slide, you see a number of areas where the student research has led to the development of policies by local municipalities and community organizations. More and more, ULinks is seen as the research arm of the community, providing resources in partnership with the university that would otherwise be unattainable. And now I'm happy to hand this over to Emily to hear about it from a student perspective.
My name is Emily Amon, and I'm a graduate student at Trent University studying the impacts of community-based research. I thought for today's presentation, I'd start by giving a bit of background on myself and my own personal journey with community-based research, and then move into the current research that I'm doing, which is evaluating the impacts of ULinks on this community. So you see here on this slide a quote from 2016 when I first took I took an environmental policy course with Stephen Hill, and during that course we were involved in some community-based research work that was smaller engagements, but that allowed us to interact with the community. And so this was a spotlight on that. So it says, by integrating our coursework into a community project, we were challenged to examine how different people are influenced by policies and how best to present the issues and solutions to a diverse audience. We learned to respect multiple forms of knowing and value community support in making these decisions and discussing environmental problems. So I think that's just a good way of summarizing. Those are my early thoughts, and I've continued along that line for the rest of my academic career for sure. So in 2016, I also completed my first community-based research project. Working with a local conservation authority, I studied the potential impacts of gray water discharge from houseboats along the Trent-Severn waterway, which is a controlled waterway in our area. So this research involved a literature review on the contaminants of gray water, as well as different boating practices. It involved a community survey on boating practices, as well as an interview with a local houseboat company. My results mapped the priority management areas for dealing with gray water discharge, and it was an exciting opportunity that allowed me to see the value of the work that I was able to accomplish. I was just in second year at the time, and so this opportunity really showed me that I could do different things that would be of value to an organization beyond just traditional research. So, fast forward to the following year, and I decided to take on a thesis project, undergraduate thesis project. And so I did this project for Green Up, which is a local green organization in Peterborough that was involved at the time with implementing different rain garden projects around our city. So my project involved mapping priority areas for managing stormwater in the face of ongoing development adjacent to an ecologically significant park and creek. And for those who don't know, Peterborough has a long history of flooding. And so this project actually was able to capitalize on some ongoing stormwater policy debates, as well as the controversy of this ongoing development. I was able to present my findings to council, and the results of my report have been continued to be used by Green Up. So in their ongoing work to target new rain garden projects. And as you can see here, in October of this year, the policy that I helped to recommend and to support in my presentation to council will actually come into effect. So that was an exciting outcome of the work that I was involved with there. So I've just compiled a number of different headlines that have kind of come up from different research that I've been involved with over the time. So just to suffice to say, community-based research definitely creates a buzz, but how do we know whether or not it's actually affecting change? So that brings me to my current research. How do we assess impact when it comes to community-based research? When we're dealing with community-based research, it's not so traditional, cause and effect. It's non-linear. And so we're dealing with social systems. The impacts are often contextual and attributed differently by different stakeholders. The impacts can relate both to the project outcomes, so the recommendations of the report directly, or to the process of the research itself, so different relationship building, meeting new people and getting involved, and those impacts can continue on into the future beyond the scope of the project itself. I've found that evaluation theories can provide a defensible methodology, and so throughout my master's research, I've been using a contribution and realist analysis in order to determine the narrative of change or contribution story that's come out from this research. So all of this starts and it rests on a theory of change. Theory of change is the underlying logic between what a program does and its intended outcomes. And so with the management committee this past February, we worked to identify some of the goals of ULinks and the ways in which they hope to achieve those goals. And then now I've gone through, over the summer, I've been living at Windy Pine, as Jim mentioned, and I've been embedded within the community and having interviews with different past project hosts and ULinks administrators to hear but different research that's been done and how it's affected change within their organization or on a personal or communal level. I've also released a community survey to hear from the local community that may not be as involved with ULinks directly about the perceptions of change that they've felt around their community. Over through the fall and into the winter, I will be compiling a contribution narrative and assessing how that fits in with the initial theory of change in order to reconstruct a new theory that may relate to what we can do as facilitators of community-based research to ensure that projects that we develop have the potential to contribute locally to different changes, either in policy or to affect change on a more organizational level. So here is some of the preliminary findings. The background of this slide is my theory of change poster that came through from that initial workshop. I've had 26 interviews and about 100 survey respondents, and some early themes that have come up have included outcomes of new relationships, recognition, policy changes, management plans that have come out, different reflections or internal evaluations that organizations have then undergone as a result of the research, new products, and baseline data and monitoring. There's some key factors that I've also started to notice, including project sequencing. So this idea of a project isn't just to fill the need of a student for one semester or 2 semesters, but to have this, if the organization has a larger initial plan around where the research is going to go and what they'd like to do with it, they can break these projects up into smaller projects and then compile the data from a number of projects in order to strategically meet a certain objective. And so that kind of blends into the next point, which is scoping. A lot of times these projects are a shorter term engagement, and so having the ability to scope down the project seems to be a very important part of ensuring that these projects lead to successful outcomes for both the student and for the host. And finally, the student-host relationship. One of the things that I find really special about this relationship that Trent University has with ULinks is this reciprocal relationship, especially from the perspective of governance. And so with the community itself proposing the project ideas and proposing the research that should be answered, we need to ensure that we, as students and from the university perspective, take into consideration the responsibility of ensuring a successful outcome. So with all that being said, I now pass it on to Stephen Hill to discuss the university's perspective.
All right, thanks, Emily. This is we've just heard about how ULinks and the work of the community-based research program has been important in Haliburton, and how it's been important in Emily's, as an example of a student whose academic career and future professional career has been influenced and changed. And I just want to take a little bit of time and talk about how we as the university have and can be transformed and can be impacted by this approach to research and creating new knowledge. So obviously universities are embedded within a particular community. They know that's where they're located, and there's a requirement for a university to be a good institutional citizen, that they have this potential to transform communities. So particularly for rural communities that have some kind of access to post-secondary research or post-secondary work, it can be transformative. You think of the major cities of the urban areas of the world, they have these major universities. It's more difficult for a lot of rural areas to have access to that kind of post-secondary college and university activities. So we have to think about ourselves as institutional citizens to understand that the community that we might see as a university, in the case of Trent, of Peterborough, isn't necessarily the communities that view us as their university. So Haliburton views very much Trent as a university that it's partnered with. Other communities across Canada where many students come from and return home are part of this part of our community. So we have to think about that within the work that we do, which is teaching and research with our students. Universities are exciting and vibrant places because we have young people who are curious about the world. And so we do have that kind of capacity that we can help share. So this kind of approach to teaching and research can be transformative to the way that we operate. So getting out from behind the podium in a classroom or doing research with partners in the real world changes the way that we do work and changes how I operate as a faculty member. It's less about having a set of slides and talking about the latest ideas, and it's more about having students come and discover through these applied projects, through these real projects that are important for our community partners, their own learning. And that's transformative for how I teach. It's also transformative for how I research and think about the co-construction and the co-creation of knowledge with real community problems. I think in the second line here, this is important for the future of the post-secondary world because it helps nurture the legitimacy and relevance that we have to the public, to the communities in which we operate, and to the a vast amount of the money that comes into universities and colleges comes from provincial governments in Canada. So it's important for us to be very aware of our public and social responsibility. Here's a couple of examples of how it's transformed teaching and learning in Peterborough in my own personal examples. You have there the Peterborough bike count, and that's first year students, and we're arranging this right now, counting cyclists and pedestrians over the last 6 or 7 years now, compiling really useful data for the city of Peterborough to understand what sort of active transportation infrastructure would be important in helping enable and improve access to active transportation. So these students who go out on a number of days in September and will compile that data. There's been a number of projects of students who are analyzing and trying to make sense of that data. And it changes something because in the very first couple of weeks of university, students are out learning about their community, which they don't necessarily think of Peterborough as their community. They're thinking immediately in their very first days of university of Trent as their community. And some of these other photos, you see a group of us here in the middle, and we're in the middle of a group that was looking at active transportation, again, with Peterborough Public Health and Peterborough Green Up, and how we could discover and think about how children get to school. And so they had a project that we were looking at that, and we ran all sorts of different participatory action research techniques through the course. And that was a third-year course that we were working on. This is one of my favorite examples of something that's transformed how I teach in my first-year class. And this is, again, the stem from ULinks, and you see the Haliburton Children's Water Festival. It's Haliburton, Muskoka, Kawartha Children's Water Festival. And I think this is now about 10 years that we've had busloads of students go up, and they are the volunteers helping out to run the activity centers for about 1,200 grades 4, 5s, and 6s who come from their school classroom to get out and learn about water. And it's a tremendously fun thing. It's a fun day. And so this is, again, first year students from Peterborough, from Trent University, in their first month of university, getting out, climbing on a school bus at 6:30 in the morning when it's dark, and having the sun rise as they crest over into the Minden area, and climbing off that bus and spending the day in the rain or in the sunshine teaching about water. And in that instance, they suddenly learn about Haliburton. That's the first starting point. So it's another good example of a service learning activity, but the relationship is one that is enduring. This is Abbey Gardens, and I thought we should mention how it's been transformative for a lot of the work and teaching that's been happening in the School of the Environment. We've developed, in part because of a lot of our community partners, a degree in sustainable agriculture and food systems. And that degree is driven by the growing recognition of the need for local and sustainable food. And Abbey Gardens is this manifestation of that in the county of Haliburton, where a group of community members have come together and tried to think about how they could restore what is a degraded or an old aggregate mine, aggregate pit, to become something more beautiful, a garden of food production and learning and understanding of sustainable lifestyles. And so we have here pictures of students who have been part of that. And the relationship in this case is many of the projects have been at the upper year, third and fourth level, researchers looking at composting techniques and soil quality and things like that, but also into the graduate level in much the same way that Emily Amon's projects are at the graduate level. This is Melissa Johnston, who was very instrumental in working with Abbey Gardens and became embedded in the community as a key part of it through her graduate research. So that's often a more conventional way for people to be engaged in community-based research, to have that graduate student and faculty member being part of it. But I think it's important for us to see the full continuum of first-year students making a real impact and having their lives impacted, having the professors and teaching approaches impacted when these go through the full map of the curriculum. So there's lots of models I just highlight for people that are thinking about this from the academic side, from graduate student placements and internships, from a faculty research program where I might be working with a community partner, to graduate student theses, not just a placement, but a full thesis, for example, Emily, to a one-term undergraduate course where a student might spend 120 hours undertaking research. It could be within a graduate course, so not a full part of a graduate student's thesis, a double credit undergraduate honors thesis, so various options there, undergraduate courses, and then projects that are within a course, so a subset of an existing course. And we have that here at Trent, a number of courses that offer an opportunity for a student to pursue a community-based research project for their course assignment rather than a full course. And then as well, students have all sorts of co-curricular opportunities. These are outside of the academic environment that are organized by different clubs and groups. And so I think we have to highlight that as a potential for them to undertake community-based research. Students at Trent have the Impact Leadership Program, and they've been doing each year a number of research projects for those community groups because they want the experience. So all of these opportunities, I think, are important for us to be trying to emphasize and bring forward for students and in terms of creating these partnerships. The last thing I'd say is that it's not always easy, that there's lots of opportunities and there's lots of potential for this, but it really takes hard work, and it takes patience, and it takes leadership from people in the community like Jim. It takes courageous students like Emily, and it takes sometimes the opportunities for faculty like myself who had mentors, including John Wadlin and Tom Willans, who give us the space to try these things out. So it's a courageous activity, and it's one that's very important in terms of impacting and affecting rural communities. The other piece is that for universities, we need to be very explicit in thinking about the travel to and from, and how our students will get to and from these rural communities. And that's an important element. How do we create the opportunities? How do we provide the space and the resources for that to happen? So I'll stop there. Jim, did you want to say anything now?
I think you did a great job of summing it up. It was from my perspective, sitting here in Haliburton, it just is wonderful to hear the perspective from you, Emily, from a student perspective, and also from you, Stephen, from a faculty perspective. That building of the trust and relationship is so important. Most people in a rural community don't have we don't have a clue in terms of all the ins and outs of how universities work and how you actually make these things happen. And universities are rather sort of arcane institutions with very complex relationships. And having an organization like ULinks, which facilitates that conversation with the community and the university, and having professors and students who leap into this with goodwill and enthusiasm, I think really helps to transform a community.
All right, so I guess I would turn it back to you, Amy.
I wanted to thank you, Jim and Stephen and Emily, for sharing that information with us. It was very informative. For those in the audience, now is when you can ask your questions and we can start the Q&A. I was thinking of questions while you're talking. I don't know if this is like too in-depth of a question, but Emily, when you were talking about evaluation and like the realist contribution analysis, what is that? Or is that like way too much?
I knew that would be
that question because
I can give you a quick synopsis. So basically, both of those evaluation theories rest on what's called mid-range theories. So mid-range theories are what I refer to as a theory of change. It's asking the logic between an outcome and an impact, an action and an outcome. And it's just one way in which to compare and contrast between expected outcomes and realized outcomes. A contribution analysis uses that theory of change, so it would be mapped. It can be done on a smaller scale just with one organization or with ULinks, and so now we're looking at the accumulation of all of this different research and what they as an organization, as a facilitator, are hoping to achieve. What is the agenda through the actions of their different engagement techniques and the ways in which they are available both to the university and to students. And then when you're looking at constructing a contribution narrative, that's what the next phase is called, constructing the narrative. So we distill what the theory of change is, and that's a logic model, and it's usually graphically done and with some supporting documentation. And then we compile the contribution narrative by speaking to and accessing as much information as possible to support the perceptions of change or attribution, the way people have attributed different actions to outcomes because it's non-linear. So we might say, I was involved with this organization when we were working on this project, and now 15 years later, we can't even remember how we first met, but we know that it was through a ULinks project. And we've continued to work together on a number of different initiatives. And so we might say that ULinks project was a catalyst for some of these other impacts that have come through that relationship. And so my interviews with hosts have allowed me to capture some of that information, as well as some of the documentation that's come out, other times that the research has been referenced, or when it was used in a grant application for something, a next step in that research process. So those types of things, you compile it together and try to create one cohesive narrative of change, one contribution narrative. And then what a realist evaluation does, it asks for the contextual pieces. So what works for whom, when, under what circumstances. It's trying to get into more of the underlying mechanisms of change, not just can we identify that change has occurred, but what might be the process, and so what are the contributing factors, or what needs to be in place in order to realistically imagine that this might happen, make it repeatable, make it more generalized for other audiences. So that is the next piece, is part of my conversations that I've been having with people are asking them those questions. What were the things that you feel during the development stage which made a difference for the outcome of that project? And so capturing some of those underlying mechanisms is the part that starts to speak to the realist evaluation. I hope that helped to explain it a bit. It is definitely, there's quite a lot of literature on it, but that's probably the best way I can explain it.
Thanks. So some questions have come up while you were talking.
Okay, great.
The first two I think are maybe for Stevens. Terry asks, access to gray literature, summaries of all the awesome projects that have been done, could be a valuable repository for other community groups that are thinking of projects or capacity building. How can universities share this information better? Like, for example, don't keep it secret.
Yeah, I think there's two answers, Terry. One is to have organizations like ULinks and the Trent Center who act actually as the public keeper of those records and those learnings. Public libraries, the university libraries are available, and that material is available to anyone in the community, but people don't necessarily know how to use it. So it could be something even as, there's lots of different ways to make a database available to the public. So I guess, that's the one. It's some specific effort to actually make sure that information is posted and people know where to find it.
Ray's question is, does Trent provide any incentive for profs to get involved in community work? Do not many profs prefer to focus solely on research and classrooms?
Thanks, Ray. That's a good question. It's one that comes up over and over again of how do you incent professors and faculty to get involved in this, because it takes more time. It's a different type of research. It's maybe harder to have an impact with peers in a particular discipline or a particular field of study that are you see as your research colleagues, and I think that a smaller university like Trent has some advantages in terms of that, or a smaller unit within a larger academic center, academic institution can be more responsive. And also say that some of the institutions, from a cultural standpoint, a university culture that supports this, which these things can be written into tenure and promotion frameworks, but often it's the culture of what's expected that people follow. In my case, in the School of the Environment, because of my senior colleagues like Tom Willans and others, there's an expectation of community involvement, of being somewhere on the ground. And so that's articulated to you when you arrive at the university. The other thing I'd mention is that some provinces, I'm thinking particularly Alberta, where colleges have become universities. Colleges are often much more responsive because they're more grounded in their community. So Mount Royal University has a really significant community-based research and is active in that kind of thing. They're thinking more carefully about it than some of our larger research institutions. So the short answer is that it depends, but it's an important question. I direct you to Jim mentioned the Suffice Cura grant that we're part of, and that's Communities First, the impacts of community engagement. It's been a 7-year Cura research grant that's been one of the things that a few of the researchers within that group have been looking at. And so if you looked at the Suffice website, it's housed at Carleton University. There'll be some information about that. The other side, one more thing. I also think that faculty, we're paid by the public. And so we have a public responsibility. So all of the talk of, do we have an incentive to do this and do that? We do have a responsibility. So it's more than just what's our incentive. We have a responsibility to the communities in which we work and live.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm finding this really interesting because actually I did a blog post on community campus engagement, and it was all about, from that Suffice, the launch of the Community Campus Engagement Canada that happened on June 20th. And I watched the whole video a few times and did a blog post just on that I posted to the RDI site today. So this is all
great.
Really on topic with stuff that's on my mind. So we have another question from Wayne. He says, what would be some of the first steps to building relationships between communities and universities? It often seems like CBR and greater community engagement is an important goal for both universities and communities, but neither side knows where to start.
I can speak to this a bit. For us, it was the having John Wadlin and Tom Willans with their bioregionalism course actually coming to our community, and they discovered very early on that the community didn't have a clue what they were talking about, and also students were. A lot of the students were sort of focused on doing research that they wanted to do, And they discovered really quickly that that was not the way to do it. And so they really started building, personal relationships with people in the community and building that trust. And it was through that personal relationship and trust that, and through that one course, then we were able to evolve that into looking at a broader relationship with the university. I don't think communities really understand how universities work, and I think in a lot of cases, professors don't understand how communities work. So it's that spending time together and listening to each other, and coming to community events and going to university events and meeting people. It's really all that personal relationship. And for us, the personal relationship really started with Alan Wilson and
Mary Northway.
Mary and Flora. That personal relationship was actually through children's camping that happened, and through both their interests in Canadian studies, and spending a lot of time just talking about stuff, and then realizing this is really important to be on the ground in the community with that. So that personal relationship, which started probably in the 1940s, evolved into what we're seeing here now.
I would also just mention for a second that Suffice has developed a number of tools for communities and for universities individually to deal with engagement, and to, like, when you don't have a ULinks or when you don't have that facilitating organization, how do you start that process? They've created a number of tools, or they've created a toolkit for that. So that's probably also available online through their website.
Yeah, because, to be honest, some community groups simply don't need to be involved with post-secondary, with universities and colleges. This works in some instances, and there's lots of great opportunities, but their communities are doing research on their own all the time without universities, and universities and colleges can drag them down. So I think those groups need to think carefully about drag them down in the sense that it slows things up, right? We have our own timelines and our own. So if you look at the academic calendar within a school year, it doesn't align with what happens needs to happen in the real world. So there's the needs have to be matched, and that happens through discussion and relationships. So sometimes it makes sense for community groups, and other times it doesn't. And in those cases, it doesn't. You can't force it.
Do you have an example of like when it doesn't work, or do you not want it? Is that?
Well, I can. There are a number of times where the research needs to get done right away.
Yeah.
So our process is for getting projects, which will be done by the students, is you start working sort of in February, developing the projects so that you have them, the research questions together by July, so then the students can pick them up for September, and they may not work on them until the next year. And it's possible that lots of research projects don't get picked up. So sometimes something is really important to the community and needs to get done right away. And in those cases, for ULinks, what we would do is we would actually get the funding, and we would actually hire a researcher to do the work. But often, because we have a whole group of professors who we have relationships with, then we can ask their advice in terms of methodology for those things, or even hire them to be engaged in that. That didn't give you really an specific example, but there are quite a number of cases where we have done that.
Okay. Jim, did you want to share like any more detailed sort of best practices you have about facilitating the conversation between community and the university? Like types of events that work best or anything like that, I guess?
Well, one of the things is that on our management committee, we have professor from the university, a professor from the college. We also have a municipal politician. We have people from different agencies and people who are just interested community members. So it's having, that facilitates it, because you have people there who actually understand the university, but they also understand the community. So that's really important. We have this annual event called the Celebration of Research, which is it's pretty exciting because we bus students in. It's lots of community members come. We invite the politicians. So that and we often have a keynote speaker who's talking about different aspects of research. So it's also, we really work at getting the president of the university to come up and meet with us. So the people who are in the leadership team, Tom Willens, who's on our committee, always, every time there's a new president, one of the first things she has to do is come and visit us in Haliburton. So there's a lot of work that way in terms of understanding the community. So those are some examples. It's important to have meals together, have fun together, really enjoy time, go out for a beer. That's really, food, beer, being out on the water, those things are great, very facilitative. Less meetings, more lunches.
That sounds like a good recommendation. Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of the hour, and I don't think I have any more questions that have come up here. Jim, Emily, Stephen, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Well, I did want to mention a couple of the questions about, there was a question about the Suffice program. One of the things that is going forward is a national network around campus community engagement, or community campus engagement. And it's in the very early days, but people can find information about that on the Suffice website, which is CFICE. The logo is at the front of the first slide of this webinar. So if people are interested in thinking about that, both community-based organizations and universities that are interested in this kind of work are thinking about a national network and how that might be something to what could be created. The other thing to consider is that there is and has been a number of academic thinking and work on this sort of thing. What makes it effective and what is the most important. And some of those findings are shared at conferences like the CTU Expo every other year. Jim presented last year with people from ULinks. And so there is a lot of work and thinking. So this is one example, but there's many examples. The thing that's so important about this is the fact that it is a rural community that's that I think is being impacted and is impacting the university.
One thing I like to add is that ULinks, we have staff, and how key that is, and how important it is to have staff members who can stand in both worlds, so that they really understand the community, that they're respected in the community, but they can also hold their own in the university, and so that they can talk both languages, the community language and the university language. And having the right person in that position is really, really important for the success all around. And we have the right person.
And the one thing I might just add is that as it's sort of been alluded to, all of this is about relationship building. And so healthy relationships come with good communication, respect, and also just being able to make sure you're promising what you can deliver. So from the student perspective, ensuring that you match a project with the right student, and also ensuring that the project is the appropriate scope. Those types of things are really, really key to ensuring that the final product is something that all parties can be proud of, and that oftentimes where we do see things fall short is when communication breaks down, or when things were promised that are impossible within, whether it's the time scope or the ability level. So that those types of things are really important. Just in case people are thinking about, starting up these types of projects, to ensure that all parties are really well aware of each other's capabilities.
Thanks for that presentation and the Q&A, and a big thank you to our audience for attending and participating. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and thanks for participating in our PLC webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.